Starborn Café by Miss Yuki 1990. Chapter 12. Quiet Times. Uncle Harry!
Frank! Alice! It's so good to see you again!
Hadavan kneeled and the two ran into his arms, laughing brightly.
Uncle Harry, you wouldn't believe all the things going on at Hogwarts!
Frank chatted with a big grin.
Uncle Teddy is great!
Alice agreed, and Hadavan laughed and looked at Neville and Luna, who held a toddler in her arms.
Why don't we leave that for later?
Ben said to his niece and nephew.
I have something for you upstairs. Why don't you go and find it while I talk to your mama and papa?
The two grinned and nodded enthusiastically. Run away! They ran off and Hadavan stood up.
They are so full of energy,
he commented and walked over to Neville and Luna. A beautiful smile decorated his lips when little Harry looked at him in wonder.
It's good to see you again, Hadavan.
Luna spoke in that familiar, airy tone of hers, and Hadavan smiled at her while he caressed the toddler's cheek with the back of his fingers. The little one took a hold of it and looked up with his big blue eyes, and Hadavan felt warmth and a small secret desire grip his heart.
It is good to see you too, Luna. It's been a few years,
Hadavan murmured, too taken by the toddler to really pay more than necessary attention to Luna.
It's been more than just a few years, then.
She spoke and ducked her head, seeking his gaze, and then glanced at her with an apologizing expression before he looked at little Harry again, his eyes growing suspiciously glassy when the little one reached out for him with small chubby arms.
May I?
Hadavan asked, and Luna giggled softly.
Of course.
Hadavan took the little one in his arms.
Just watch out for your hair. He developed a fascination for it,
she warned, and Hadavan laughed quietly as he held the little one in his arms.
I suppose that is why you cut your hair,
he commented, because her hair now reached her chin and danced around her pretty face. She smiled and nodded.
Come, Frank and Alice will take a while to find their gifts,
Neville snorted while Hadavan led them over to a table. They already have everything they need then, he said, and they took their seats.
Allow me to spoil them a little, Neville. I see them rarely as it is.
Hadavan spoke while little Harry was being amused by trying to reach for Hadavan's bangs and making cute little cooing noises. Hadavan rocked him in his arms and popped his lips, making the baby boy giggle and laugh. Neville and Luna exchanged glances while Hadavan focused all of his attention on the little boy.
You'll be a good parent one day,
Luna commented, and Hadavan looked at her with a raised eyebrow.
I don't think that will be possible.
The only thing Luna did was hum non-committally and shrugged delicate shoulders.
We'll see.
Hadavan raised an eyebrow at her.
I have no doubt that Neville already told you who I'm dating, Luna.
The witch giggled while Neville snorted and rolled his eyes.
I have been informed about it,
Luna spoke lightly.
Neville was kind enough to rant about it for 3 hours straight last night.
I wasn't ranting, as you so kindly put it, Neville spluttered. I merely expressed my concern about that Thor character. For 3 hours.
Hadavan smirked, and Neville blushed.
Uncle Harry! Neville was saved from explaining himself by Frank and Alice running back into the cafe. Frank was holding the newest Thunderbolt 2023, while Alice cradled a book with the title Strangest Creatures of Our World and Where to Find Them to her chest like it was her greatest treasure. Are you happy with your gifts?
Hadavan asked, and the two grinned at him.
Of course we are!
Frank cheered.
Thank you, Uncle Harry!
Alice smiled at him, and Hadavan was reminded of Luna. Frank was almost all Neville with his stronger build, light brown hair and round face, while Alice was almost the same as Luna when she was young, only she had Neville's eyes. Hadavan looked at Harry, who obviously got tired of trying to reach Hadavan's bangs, and instead rested his head on Hadavan's shoulder and settled for a nap. Hadavan's lips tilted into a small, wistful smile, earning a smile from Neville and Luna, even though he couldn't see them.
One day, then,
Luna said, and Hadavan looked at her in confusion.
One day.
Hadavan was about to say something when the door opened and Thor walked in.
Good morning!
Thor stopped mid-step when Hadavan stood up, and Thor saw the toddler sleeping in Ben's arms. A shiver ran down Thor's body, and his arms darkened with desire for a second.
Thor, come. I would like you to meet my family.
Thor smiled and walked over to Hadavan while Luna and Neville stood up, and Frank and Alice walked over to stand in front of their parents, both staring at Thor with odd expressions.
You know, Neville, and this lovely creature is Luna Longbottom.
Luna smiled when Thor took her hand in his and kissed her knuckles respectfully.
It is a pleasure to meet you, madame.
The pleasure is mine, she said. And please call me Luna.
Very well.
Thor nodded. These two ruffians are Frank and Alice. Hardivan introduced the two children, and Thor kneeled so that he was at eye level with them.
Pleasure to meet you.
Thor shook hands with Frank, and Alice blushed when the God of Thunder greeted her the same way he greeted her mother. Are you really Thor, the God of Thunder? Frank asked in childish wonder, and Thor winked at the young boy.
Yes, I am,
he said, and Frank's eyes widened even more.
Are you really courting Uncle Harry?
Alice asked, and Thor looked at Hadavan, feeling pleasure surge through his body when he noticed the small light blush on Hadavan's cheeks.
Yes.
Thor stood up and approached Hadavan. He pecked his cheek before he looked down at baby Harry, sky blue eyes brightening with something unnamed as he raised a hand and cut his one chubby cheek with the back of his finger. This is Harry, Hadavan murmured, and Thor smiled, raising his head to look at Neville and Luna.
You have strong, intelligent children,
Thor spoke, and if his voice was a bit strained, no one cared enough to comment on it.
I wish you all the best.
Neville stood taller in pride, while Luna giggled and looked at Thor with a mysterious, knowing gaze, reminding Thor strongly of his brother.
Thank you, Lord Thor,
she said, and placed her hands on Alice's shoulders, while Neville placed his on Frank's shoulders, and the children smiled widely.
Please, call me Thor,
he said, and looked at Hadavan.
Steve said I had nothing to do with the tower, so I decided to come over. I hope I am not intruding.
Hadavan shook his head. You won't, he assured Thor. Would you please take Harry so that I can make some drinks for all of us? Thor's eyes widened.
I don't think...
Is that right?
Luna spoke up as they took their seats around the table, with Neville pushing a few more armchairs over. Thor shifted his weight uncomfortably and slowly took Harry from Hadavan. The toddler woke up for a moment when he was no longer leaning on a shoulder, but on a strong, firm chest. He looked up at Thor with drowsy eyes, yawned cutely, and then settled back to sleep, obviously deeming Thor good enough. Hadavan laughed quietly, and Thor looked at him with a raised eyebrow. He seems to like sleeping on you. Ben's eyes shone with mischief. One day I'll have to see if it's as comfortable as it seems. Thor chuckled, lips tilting up.
One day you'll just have to see.
He agreed and took a seat while Hadavan went to make them drinks. Neville and Luna smiled at each other. Frank made puking noises, and Alice blushed heavily. So, Thor, tell me, Neville said, and Thor looked at him. How did things go yesterday? Thor raised an eyebrow at him.
Hadavan and I had lunch. I left almost immediately because I was called to the tower.
Really now? Neville drawled and winced when Luna slapped his forearm.
Honestly, Neville, play nice,
she said as Hadavan came over with their drinks and chuckled before he took a seat. I am playing nice, Neville cried out indignantly. He's lucky he made us first and not Bill or George, mother forbid. Thor raised an eyebrow while Hadavan paled slightly. Oh, Merlin, he whispered. I completely forgot about them.
Who are they?
Thor asked. They are another two members of my family, Hadavan muttered, shifting in his seat nervously. They are very protective of Uncle Harry, Frank explained. Very, very protective. Frank.
It's true, Uncle Harry, Alice said. Uncle Teddy told us how Uncle George chased down a girl that tried to use you while you still lived in England.
Hadavan blushed while Neville scoffed. I'm owning it out I wasn't there for that. Luna giggled.
But you were there to help George chase down that Blaine guy.
Thor raised an eyebrow and looked at Hadavan, who just shook his head quietly, telling Thor that it truly, honestly didn't matter. Thor chuckled and looked down at Harry when the toddler murmured something and shifted a bit. Uncle Harry, Frank called out, and Hadavan looked at him. Yes, Frank? Are you and Mr. Thor really dating? Hadavan blushed a little and looked at Thor. Well, yes, he spoke quietly, after a moment, staring in warm blue eyes of the Thunder God. I'll have to tell Uncle Teddy that, Frank nodded, and Hadavan tensed up a bit. Maybe you should leave that to me, Frankie. Hadavan pressed out weakly, and Thor raised an eyebrow.
Who is Teddy?
My godson, Ben sighed. He is somewhat protective of me. Neville snorted while Luna giggled. Protective, right, Neville murmured, and Thor looked at him with a raised eyebrow. Ven is the only parent Teddy has ever known. Problem is that for the great part of Teddy's childhood, Ven was always out there chasing bad guys. Most of the time, he'd come home injured in some way, and Teddy constantly worried about it. I think he was the happiest among us when Ven finally retired. He is also the one that you should worry the most about if you want to be accepted into the family.
True, Luna piped out. Molly and Arthur will accept you when they see that Ven is happy. Bill and Charlie will probably stop at threatening you. George will most probably try to prank you to see if you're strong enough to keep up with Ven. We've already accepted you.
Luna counted. Neville was about to say something, but Luna just squeezed his hand in warning and his mouth snapped closed.
Teddy will most probably be suspicious about you, and it will take a while for you to convince him of your intentions towards Ven.
Thor hummed, gazing at Ven as though he was looking at the fulfillment of every single one of his desires.
Then I shall prove to him my intentions towards Hadaven are honourable, he said. I found him at last, and I do not intend to lose him for whatever reason.
Hadaven bowed his head a little so that his bangs hid his eyes, but he couldn't hide the small smile decorating his full lips. Neville licked his lips. He wasn't blind. He could see that the connection between Thor and Ven was already growing in strength. He wasn't stupid enough to think this was just a coincidence. Sadly, there was no such thing as coincidence in Hadaven's life. Destiny was quite cruel when it came to the raven-haired wizard. Neville only hoped that Thor was Destiny's way of repaying Hadaven for everything bad that happened in his life. You know what, Thor? The God of Thunder looked at Neville. I hate to admit this, but... He took a deep breath and nodded. You're not that bad, you know. Thor straightened a bit while Hadaven shot a grateful smile at Neville. Neville smiled at his best friend and squeezed back at Luna's hand when his beautiful wife squeezed it in thanks. You won't up bad at all. Night fell, and Hadaven sighed as he stood in the doorway of the cafe, watching the snow fall.
Are you well, my sweet?
He smiled and leaned his head against the doorframe. He hugged his arms around his waist, trying to keep the cold away.
I am, and I really am.
He felt a gentle caress against his brow. I'm glad. I was getting worried about your sweetness. Thor couldn't have chosen a better moment to come back.
I wouldn't have complained had he arrived earlier.
He felt a playful warm wind dance through his ponytail.
But I'm glad he's finally here. I don't think I would have been able to hold on for much longer.
I know, my sweet. Why don't you come in now? I don't want you to catch a cold.
Hadaven chuckled and pushed away from the doorframe. He hesitated when he saw a familiar form come around the corner. For a second, he squinted, only to smile when Thor walked into the light and offered Hadaven a sheepish smile.
I know we have seen each other this morning, but...
Thor stopped when Hadaven looked at him fondly and beckoned him in.
Come in. I was just about to make some warm chocolate and sit in front of the fireplace.
Thor smiled and walked over to stand in front of him. He cupped Hadaven's cheek with his right hand while he put his left on Hadaven's waist and pulled him in for a kiss. Hadaven moaned and fisted his hands on Thor's chest, sighing contentedly when the warmth of the thunder god enveloped him completely.
I would love to join you if you don't mind.
Thor spoke against Hadaven's lips, and the slightly smaller man chuckled.
I wouldn't mind at all.
They entered the cafe, and the door closed and locked behind them, making Thor raise an eyebrow and smirk. Hadaven returned it with a smirk of his own as he made his way over to the bar.
It is almost midnight. I rarely have guests at this hour.
Thor nodded as he took his jacket off to hang it on the hanger.
I suppose that is good news for me,
he said as he walked over to the bar. Hadaven was so into making the warm chocolate that he didn't notice Thor stop behind him until the God of Thunder wrapped his strong arms around Hadaven's waist and pulled him against his strong body.
Thor! Hush!
Thor whispered and unwrapped one arm from around Hadaven's waist to throw the long tresses over Hadaven's shoulder, revealing the long column of the wizard's neck to place a loving kiss on the line of black hair.
I'll mess up the chocolates!
Hadaven warned, but closed his eyes in pleasure when Thor hugged him tightly against his strong body and kissed Ven's shoulder through the soft material of his turtleneck.
I care little for that.
Thor spoke honestly and rested his head against Hadaven's. He sighed a little and closed his eyes, smiling when Hadaven rested his hands over his.
You looked absolutely beautiful this morning, you know,
Thor whispered, and Hadoven hummed questioningly.
When you held that child, you looked beautiful.
Hadoven smiled a little.
Young Frank and Alice love you as well, I could see that, although I am a little concerned about your family.
You don't need to be. Hadoven pushed away a little to turn in Thor's hold and look up at him. Thor didn't remove his arms from around Hadoven's waist, and the raven-haired man reached up and wrapped his arms around Thor's wide shoulders. My family only wants to see me happy, and I am. Thor smiled and bowed down to kiss Hadoven lovingly.
I am glad to hear that.
He spoke against Hadoven's lips, and the wizard shivered. His heart started beating faster, and he swallowed with slight difficulties. Chocolate, he muttered, and Thor laughed deeply. I was going to make some warm chocolate, and we were about to sit in front of the fire, and... Thor interrupted him with a kiss. He cupped Hadoven's cheek and pulled him as close as he could get, making the wizard moan and lean into Thor.
Why don't you forget about that chocolate? We go to your living room, sit on that comfortable-looking couch, and just talk.
Thor asked in a whisper, and Hadoven laughed breathlessly. Just talk? Thor smiled before he placed a loving kiss on Hadoven's forehead.
I wouldn't mind holding you like this.
Hadoven tilted his head to the side in slight wonder, although his eyes were filled with warmth. Thor smiled and gently caressed Ven's cheek with his thumb.
We have all the time in the world, Thor said. I just wish to enjoy your company for now.
Hadoven gifted him with the most beautiful smile Thor has ever seen. Very well. Hadoven pushed back a little and took Thor's hand in his. Come. Thor smiled and allowed Hadoven to lead him up into the loft. As the night went on, they talked about everything and nothing, with Hadoven nestled in Thor's arms with his head rested on Thor's shoulder. Snow was slowly covering the city, and night was slowly giving way to a new day. Thor smiled when he looked down at Hadoven's peaceful sleeping face. He gently kissed the crown of Ven's head and settled more comfortably on the couch. He was happy at last. Thor has always been missing a part of himself, always looking for something that was missing. Ever since he first laid eyes on Hadoven, that part of him seemed to be filled slowly with fragments of Hadoven. His calm smiles, knowing glances, enchanting smell, tender, almost hesitant touches. Finally, Thor could say that he has found a missing piece of himself, and he swore he would never lose it, no matter what he would have to do.